Welcome to the World Health Organization Disability Assessment Schedule, or WHODAS 2.0, Administration and Scoring for Purpose of 1959 Eligibility Determination Training. I'm Dr. Dan Kramer, psychologist with the North Dakota Department of Human Services Field Services Division. The information presented today is intended for anyone administering or preparing to administer the WHODAS for the purpose of determining 1959 eligibility. This training is in addition to the required general training on the WHO website and additional training resources available on the 1959 website. It is expected that individuals preparing to administer the WHODAS as part of determining 1959 eligibility have completed the WHODAS training Part 1, 1959 Medicaid Policy and Procedures training prior to completing this. We'll talk briefly about modes of administering the WHODAS. There are three approved modes of administering the WHODAS, including self-administration, interview, and proxy. However, for the purpose of 1959 eligibility determination, there are two approved administration method types. These include the interview and proxy. In discussing proxy, what that means is an individual's representative may provide third-party view of the individual's functioning. And when being assessed for 1959 eligibility, an individual's representative means their legal guardian. Essential components of the interview. Most critically, standardization. WHODAS 2.0 interviews should be conducted in the same way with each participant. Such standardization helps to ensure that differences in participants' responses are due not to differences in the way the interview is conducted. A critical component of this then is privacy. This ensures that a high comfort level, which in turn gives the most accurate responses. When WHODAS 2.0 is administered through an interview, this should be conducted in a closed room where responses cannot be overheard. Frames of reference. For all WHODAS 2.0 versions, respondents should answer questions with the following frames of reference in mind. Frame 1, degree of difficulty. Frame 2, due to health conditions. Frame 3, in the past 30 days. Frame 4, averaging good days and bad days. Frame 5, as the respondent usually does the activity. Frame 6, items not experienced in the past 30 days are not rated. Interviewers should be prepared to remind respondents about these frames of reference as needed. They're also embedded in much of the instructions. We'll talk a bit more about these frames in the upcoming slides. So the first frame of reference is degree of difficulty. During the interview, respondents are asked questions about the degree of difficulty that they experience in doing different activities. For WHODAS 2.0, having difficulty with an activity means increased effort, discomfort or pain, slowness, changes in the way the person does the activity. And again, those are embedded in instructions for many of the questions. Frame of reference 2, due to health conditions. Respondents are asked to answer about difficulties due to any health conditions, such as diseases, illnesses or other health problems, injuries, mental or emotional problems, problems with alcohol, problems with drugs. Interviewers should feel free to remind respondents to think about difficulty with activities due to health conditions rather than to other causes. If a respondent has difficulty with bathing simply because it is cold, the item would be rated 1 for none or no difficulty. However, if the respondent is unable to wash due to arthritis, the item would be rated 5 for extreme or cannot do. Frame of reference 3, in the past 30 days. Recall abilities are most accurate for the period of 1 month. The past 30 days was therefore selected as the time frame for WHODAS 2.0. Frame of reference 4, averaging good days and bad days. Some respondents will experience variability in the degree of difficulty that they experience over 30 days. In these cases, respondents should be asked to give a rating that averages those good days and bad days. Frame of reference 5, as the respondent usually does the activity. Respondents should rate the difficulty experienced by taking into consideration how they usually do the activity. If assistive devices or personal assistants are usually available, respondents should keep this in mind. For example, as mentioned above, item domain Domain 3, item 1 asks, how much difficulty did you have in washing your whole body? And possible responses again range from none to extreme or cannot do or not applicable. If a respondent with a spinal cord injury has a personal assistant who helps daily with bathing and therefore experiences no difficulty with washing his or her whole body because of the help, this item would be rated 1 for none. Frame of reference 6, items rated as not applicable. WHODAS 2.0 seeks to determine the amount of difficulty encountered in activities that a person actually does, as opposed to activities that the person would like to do or can do but does not actually do. Interviewers should determine whether responses are applicable. For example, domain 2, question 5 asks, how much difficulty did you have in walking a long distance, such as 1 kilometer? And responses again range from none to extreme or cannot do or not applicable. If a respondent cannot walk 1 kilometer because he or she has a leg fracture, the item would be rated a 5 for extreme or cannot do. However, if a respondent has not tried to walk 1 kilometer simply because he or she drives everywhere, then the item would be coded as NA for not applicable. So this slide highlights the 6 domains. They'll be talked about briefly on the following slides as well. However, just an overview here is domain 1 is cognition, domain 2 is mobility, domain 3 is self-care, domain 4 is getting along with others, domain 5 is like life activities, and domain 6 is participation. Each of these domains has its own unique introduction, as well then as questions that load to these domain scores. In discussing the actual administration of the WHODAS, it is recommended that you complete the WHODAS using the appropriate forms available through the WHO website. So they're included here are links for the interview form as well as the proxy form. These forms will guide you through the completion of the interview and allow you to make sure support you in completing this in a standardized way. Included in the forms that are provided by the WHO are what are identified as typographical conventions. These are also highlighted in the WHO manual and serve as basic guidance on how to introduce and complete the interview. We'll review these on the following slides. Interviewer questions. Anything written in standard blueprint as highlighted here is meant to be read to the respondent. For example, A4, what is your current marital status? When it's written in blue like this, you read it verbatim as it is written. Skips within questions. Skip instructions are printed in bold and italics, so they would not be read to the participant, but instead be followed. For example, in domain 5, question number 7, if box is checked, continue, otherwise skip to domain 6 on the next page. Okay, and this is related to whether the individual is working or in school. And if they are not, then you'd skip and go to domain 6. So we'll talk about that a bit more also. Underline type. Within questions, words in underlined typeface are keywords or phrases that are meant to be emphasized when read to the respondent. For example, domain 1, question 1, concentrating on doing something for 10 minutes. So you want to highlight concentrating as well as 10 minutes, because that is really what we're asking about, their ability to attend to concentrate on something as well as the period of time. So you want to make sure you highlight in the way you read the item those words that are underlined. Verbatim entries. And this is about recording what the respondent states. So a blank line is provided when the interviewer is to record the respondent's answer. Responses should be recorded exactly as stated. This type of response is requested when further detail is needed. For example, A3, how many years in all did you spend studying in school, college, or university? And again, there's the blank line in which the verbatim response of the participant is meant to be written. Parentheses. Parentheses contain examples to illustrate a point. All items in the parentheses are to be read to the respondent. So for example, item 4 below, how much of a problem did you have in joining community activities? For example, festivities, religious or other activities, in the same way as anyone else. So again, it's part of the blueprint. It's in parentheses, and so would be read verbatim to the respondent. Square brackets. Square brackets contain instructions to translators. English-speaking interviewers may also follow these guidelines if needed to increase the clarity of the question or the applicability in the respondent's culture. Walking a long distance, for example, walking a long distance such as a kilometer or equivalent. Now I'll talk briefly here about recording data, so how you actually document the individual's responses. Interviewer corrections. So if an incorrect answer is circled, because respondents changed their mind or made a mistake, put a slash through the incorrect answer and circle the correct answer. And then for all other items, close questions and circling answers. Write or type all answers in the spaces provided. So you're going to want to write exactly as the person indicates or circle the appropriate response as they have identified the degree of difficulty. Most questions require that an answer be circled. Make sure that the circle encloses only one number because the computer will only allow one response selection. So again, that's if it's computer scored. I think it would often not be for 1915I. However, still to be clear for the purposes of transposing to the data sheet, circling clearly what response was given. So introduction and demographic background information. The WHO asks that the written here instruction is provided when introducing the WHODAS. And so you'd identify to the respondent, this interview has been developed by the World Health Organization to better understand the difficulties people may have due to their health conditions. I will start with some background information or background questions. So again, this is just a image that comes directly from the record sheet provided by the WHO. And it goes through and shows exactly, again, in blue, what you would say and underline what you would emphasize, and then give example here of where you'd circle to highlight the individual's response. So it's an example of how the recording, introduction and recording of the interview proceeds. The interview also includes what is identified as a preamble. The preamble reads, and this is a part of the instruction that you provide, this interview is about difficulties people have because of health conditions. You're prompted then to show the respondent the flashcard, the first flashcard, and you'd point first to that flashcard number 1 and explain that difficulty with an activity means increased effort, discomfort or pain, slowness, changes in the way you do the activity. So again, this goes back to our frames of reference. So this flashcard then is provided and put in front of the respondent, and they are able to reference it throughout the course of the interview. And in fact, you'll potentially be prompted and asked to point at it at different times throughout the interview. And again, you see the frames of reference highlighted throughout this flashcard number 1, both with types of health conditions, what increased difficulty means, and then for the frame of reference regarding the past 30 days. So you'd introduce this flashcard number 1 to the client. It's important that you have this printed out and available for them so that they can have in front of them as you proceed through the interview. There's additionally a flashcard number 2. You would introduce this as use this scale when responding and read aloud the options, which include none, mild, moderate, severe, extreme, or cannot do. Okay, so then those two flashcards then would be provided to the respondent and in front of them throughout the course of the interview. So let's talk about actually asking the questions. It's important that you read the questions as they are written. And again, this goes back to our discussion earlier about standardization and to assure that we achieve valid and reliable results for the respondent or the individual being having the WHODAS administered on. Reading the questions as they are written. Read questions to the respondent exactly as they appear in the questionnaire. There are 2 exceptions to this rule in the administration of the WHODAS 2.0, grammatical changes and verifying responses. Okay, so with grammatical changes, if necessary, adjust the wording of a question to make it grammatically correct. This mainly occurs when only one difficulty is identified in a domain. For example, in response to the question, How much do these difficulties interfere with your life? If a respondent indicates only one difficulty in the domain, change the word difficulties to the singular difficulty, and these to this. Again, this is something that you might naturally just do. However, be mindful that that is something that is allowed. And then the second exception is verifying responses. If necessary, modify the form of the word used in the rating scale to make better sense. For example, in response to the question, how much have you been emotionally affected by your health condition? The answer none would be odd and grammatically incorrect. In this case, none can be changed to not at all to be grammatically correct. Many respondents, again, make the shift automatically, but the interviewer can provide guidance if necessary. Continuing with instruction regarding asking the question, make sure you read the entire question. Before accepting an answer, make sure that the respondent has heard the entire question to ensure that the person is considering all concepts in the question. If the respondent interrupts before hearing the whole question, repeat the question, making sure that the respondent hears it through all the way to the end. Do not assume that a premature response applies to the question as written. So again, if they answer before you've completed the question, repeat and read the whole thing to make sure that they've heard it. Use lead-in phrases. The phrase, how much difficulty did you have in, is used frequently throughout the interview. Repeat this phrase more or less frequently as necessary to help the respondent to complete the interview or to make the line of questioning flow more smoothly. So again, the WHO does not provide guidance on exactly how often to repeat the full phrase, how much difficulty did you have in, because within each domain, it's identified to read at least at the beginning. However, you can repeat that phrase throughout as necessary, again, potentially based on the degree of challenge the person might be experiencing and answering the questions, and so may repeat it more often for those folks that are struggling with understanding questions or following along. Use flashcards when instructed. As talked about earlier, we identified that the flashcards would be in front of the respondent throughout the course of the interview. Most questions use flashcards to remind the respondent of key information. The text "point to flashcard number" appears at each point where a flashcard is to be shown. So again, you can go ahead and make sure you point those out when it's so indicated. Do not make assumptions about the respondent's answers. It can be tempting, based on assumptions or knowledge of a person, to skip those questions or to introduce them with a phrase like, I know this probably doesn't apply to you, but practices such as these make it impossible to get accurate information or to learn more, or to learn to what extent answers to earlier questions actually do predict answers to later ones. So again, this can be tempting based on previous responses within the administration of the WHO. Also can be dangerous or a challenge for those individuals that may be known to the interviewer. You might be tempted to prompt or lead the client or individual a certain direction based on your knowledge of challenges they have or don't have. To be very careful about that bias or potential bias, and to be neutral and objective always in administering each item. Clarifying unclear responses. Rules for clarification and probing. First one, if you doubt that a respondent's heard the entire question, repeat it. For example, if respondents answer irrelevant information irrelevantly, or do not appear to understand all aspects of the question, reread either the whole question or the portion that was not understood. When respondents ask about a specific part of the question, repeat only that part. Do not make assumptions about the respondent's answers. When asked to repeat one response option, repeat all response options, only omitting a response option if respondents have already clearly eliminated that option. So again, when you read through the none, not at all the way up to extreme or severe, cannot do, make sure you read each option every time. Use only those question text or neutral probes to avoid introducing bias into the question. So again, we'll talk about probes that are recommended by WHO to use, and to make sure that you're relying on those and those that are provided by the manual instructions, including instructions that clarify each question item, relying on that so as to remain neutral and objective. In repeating a question, it is sometimes helpful to use a neutral introduction to make a smoother transition. For example, preface the repeated question with, overall, let me repeat the question, well, in general, generally speaking, etc. If respondents ask for clarification about what is being asked, first simply repeat the question. If respondents do not find this approach helpful, use the explanations as they are written in the question-by-question specifications, which is in the Chapter 7 of the WHO manual. Do not use any other definition of terms or explanations. Okay, so that's an important prompt or guide for you, is to, and we'll talk about it, I think, also a bit here, but to be aware that there is this question-by-question specification provided, and so it identifies the intent of each question, as well as what common questions might be and how to respond to those. If respondents request a definition for a term or an explanation that is not in the question-by-question objectives, instruct them to answer the question using their own definition or interpretation of the word, phrase, or concept in question. To do this, use phrases such as, whatever that means to you, whatever you think of as. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that there are times where you may need to use neutral probes. So let's talk about that. You can use neutral probes as necessary to help respondents provide descriptions when requested as part of the interview. So if they're struggling with responses, for example, you can identify, can you give me your best guess? Can you provide one overall rating? What is your best estimate? What do you think? So again, prompting them towards providing a response. Common probing situations. Respondents may sometimes feel that a question does not apply, so it's not applicable. In this case, record NA on the left margin of the response form. It's important to probe all questions of not applicable. If in the process of probing, it appears that respondents feel a question is not applicable because they cannot do the activity, you would then score the item as a 5 on the scale of cannot do. Other situations for probing include when the individual gives a response of I don't know. The general rule when respondents give a response of I don't know is to repeat the question. If this is unsuccessful, probe respondents once before accepting that don't know. An effort at recall should be encouraged with a probe such as, could you give me your best estimate? If respondents still cannot respond, don't know is then recorded, or DK is recorded in the left margin. So the computerized version of it, which again I don't think will be commonly used with 15I, provides a DK response category. Otherwise, we would just make sure to include it in our margin. Discrepancies. Discrepancies, look out for discrepant responses. Refer respondents back to the information on the flashcards as often as necessary if it seems that such information is being forgotten. For example, where respondents are clearly answering questions, but are indicating difficulties for reasons other than the health condition, it can be helpful to use information on the flats as a flashcard as a reminder. So I will not go through each domain and each question item, as the WHO manual does, I think, a very nice job of identifying instructions for each domain and then calling out clearly how you would read and walk through each one. However, there are two domains that have unique circumstances that I do want to call out. The first of these is domain 5, which is life activities. There are two sections within domain 5. The first of these is household activities, and the second of these are work or school activities. Household activities will always be completed for all respondents. So you would ask those through the interview, either with the individual or the proxy, in all cases. However, only complete the work or school activities section if the respondent works either in paid, non-paid work, or is self-employed, or alternatively, the respondent is going to school. If neither of these situations applies, they do not work and they're not in school, you would go ahead and skip this section and proceed to domain 6. Okay, so then the work or school activities would not be completed. We will discuss in the scoring section of this training how to manage the scoring of circumstances when those items are skipped. Then the second domain that has kind of a unique shift that I think is important to call out is domain 6. So domain 6 represents a shift from the line of questioning used in the previous 5 domains. In this domain, respondents are asked to consider how other people in the world around them make it difficult for them to take part in society. Here they're reporting not on their difficulty limitations, but rather on the restrictions they experience from people, laws, and other features of the world in which they find themselves. The underlined phrases in the introduction must be emphasized to help respondents shift their mindset and understand what is being asked. Respondents need to understand that the focus of these questions is on problems encountered because of the society in which they live, rather than because of their own difficulties. An example here is, how much of a problem did you have in joining community activities? For example, festivities, religious or other activities, in the same way anyone else can. Okay. So making sure to highlight that in the instructions and then potentially in the prompts given as domain 6 is gone through during the interview process. All right, so common questions. As I mentioned, there is the chapter 7 within the manual that will walk through each of the questions, as well as common questions that might get asked about these items. They give questions, so the manual includes these question by question specifications. They're available for all 36 items. It is your responsibility as someone who administers the WHODAS to be familiar with these frequently asked questions and responses, as well as these question by question specifications, and to keep this close at hand during administration. So providing here an example of what that might look like. So for domain 2, question 3, the question itself to the respondent is, in the past 30 days, how much difficulty did you have moving around inside your home? So the guidance then, to help clarify any questions the respondent might have, this item refers to moving from room to room and moving within rooms, using assistive devices or personal help that is usually in place. If a respondent lives in a house with multiple floors, the question also includes getting from one floor to another as needed. So based on the question or a lack of understanding the respondent might have, you can use this guidance provided within the manual to help answer any of those questions that they have. The manual also highlights common problems and provides solutions to those that I think is worth spending a little bit of time going through. So when to code NA versus cannot do is the first problem. So if a respondent is prevented from doing an activity due to a health condition, rate the item as 5 for extreme or cannot do. If a respondent has not experienced an activity in the past 30 days, but this is not due to a health condition, code the item as NA for not applicable. Again, so we've talked about that before, but highlighting it because it's a common challenge in figuring out how to rate. The next problem, the respondent gives an answer that does not correspond with my or others' understanding of the respondent's current functioning. Okay, so this is important. WHODAS 2.0 measures responses from the perspective of the respondent, or in the case of proxy versions, from a proxy respondent, referring to the primary respondent's functioning. Although an interviewer might not always agree with the respondent's answer, the answer given must be the one recorded. Okay, so we cannot deviate our responses based on our belief that what they stated is not correct. It must be what the respondent identified. And just to highlight for a minute, remembering that this is a standardized tool that has been normed in a population with a variety of different health disabilities. It was standardized and normed using the instructions as identified here. And so using it so that the respondent's responses are what drives the score and what drives the level of functional impairment identified. So being clear that, again, we don't deviate from the standardized approach that was developed and used in the research of the tool. Problem, the respondent does not give a clearly codable answer. Solution, if the respondent does not give clear answers, probe the respondent for further clarification. Again, please Please reference the probe slide above for examples of how to do this. Problem: the respondent becomes annoyed by repetitious questions. Solution for this: some of the WHODAS 2.0 questions sound similar. In some cases, the respondent might become annoyed and assume that the interviewer was not listening to a previous response. In this situation, the interviewer has two options. The first, ask the question with a preface, that is, read the question with a preface that acknowledges previous responses. For example, you told me before that, but I still need to ask you this question as it is written. Confirm, or second option, confirm the response. That is, reword the question in a way that confirms the information that the respondent already gave. For example, you told me before that, and then is that correct? Youth-specific administration. Per guidance from a consultant with the WHO, the WHODAS can be used for individuals across the lifespan, including those under 18 years of age. Okay, so due to the language level of this tool, it is recommended that when completing the WHODAS with youth ages 12 and under, the proxy version is utilized with Guardian, unless there's a clinical indication otherwise. For individuals 13 to 18, either the interview with the individual or proxy with Guardian as respondent version may be used as determined appropriate based on unique circumstances that that person is encountering. Examples may require, so actually as you go through the interview, examples may require modification to match to age appropriate expectations. So for example, staying by yourself for a few days, again, based on age of participant, that would potentially not be age appropriate, can be introduced as staying safe when you're alone or not putting yourself in danger when there are no adults around. Another example where this might take place is getting all your work done. So domain 5, question number 7, which is about work. Getting all your work done as quickly as needed. It's important that you remember you can remind youth or proxy completing for youth that work can include schoolwork. Scoring overview. The WHO has approved or has identified two different scoring methods. There is simple scoring and complex scoring. In simple scoring, the scores are assigned to each of the items. None equals 1, mild 2, moderate 3, severe 4, 5, extreme or cannot do. Those items are summed for each domain, and then for total score, there's no weighting of individual items. The second method is the complex method, and this is based on item response theory. This method allows for differential weighting of each item based on severity or contribution to disability, and allows comparative analysis then across populations or subpopulations. So this method then allows for, if there are certain items that contribute, are known to contribute more to disability, greater weight is provided within the scoring of the item and the scoring of the tool. Per 1959, the complex method is the approved method, and so that will be, as we continue through the scoring, we will talk about the complex method, how to score, and how to then interpret that. So scoring application to eligibility. So when being used to determine eligibility for 1959, there's an overall complex score of 50 or greater is required. In addition to the overall score, domain scores can be used to assist in the 1959 care coordination or the care coordinator identifying unique areas of deficit, impairment, and so inform which services would be authorized through the plan of care. So this will identify which areas of unique deficit or struggle individual has, and so help highlight what specific services would be helpful for them. So as we talk about scoring, we'll talk about how to identify both the unique domain scores as well as the overall summary complex score. Scoring. So there are 3 steps identified within the complex scoring method. First is summing of recoded items scores within each domain. Then first identifying the scores, and then I'm going to introduce a spreadsheet in a moment that will talk about how to complete this process. The spreadsheet will assist you in automatically recoding the items, which then allows for us to complete step 2 and 3, which is summing of the domain scores and then converting to a summary score, converting the summary score into a metric ranging from 0 to 100, where 0 is no disability and 100 is full disability. So before we show the spreadsheet, just wanted to talk briefly about what to do with missing answers. And missing answers, as we talked about earlier, can be the result of a few different things. One is if the individual is not working or in school, we'll talk about that. But also if there are items that were identified as not applicable or the respondent identified as I don't know, and even through probes and prompts was not able to provide an answer. So if the client or respondent is not working and has given responses to the 32 item WHODAS 2.0, so they did not answer those additional 4 items, the score can be used as it is. The further details of this will be provided in the spreadsheet data entry overview, and it will still be comparable to that of the full 36 item score. In all other situations where 1 or 2 items are missing, and to be clear, it's 1 or 2 items. If it's more than 2 items outside of those work school questions, then the tool is identified as invalid. But if it's 1 or 2 items are missing, the mean score across all items within the domain should be assigned to the missing items. So what that means is you would average. So if there's an item missing within mobility, but they responded to all other items within mobility, you would add up and the other or average out the score of the other items and then provide that to the missing item. So again, this method should not be used if more than 2 items are missing. In addition, if domain-wise scores are being computed for domains, the 2 missing items cannot come from the same domain. So if there's more than 1 item missing within a domain, we cannot provide that domain score and so cannot provide the complex total score. So this really highlights the importance of adequate probing and prompting of the client and helping them come to answers and complete the WHODAS fully. All right, so I will go ahead and move forward with showing the data entry spreadsheet. So this is going to be made available to all of you. And we'll go through it tab by tab. Again, the recommendation, as we talked about earlier in the training, is that you would use the WHO form to complete the interview and then to record their scores. You would then take those scores and translate them into this spreadsheet to tabulate the total score as well as the domain-specific scores. So you'd carry forward their responses. So here you'd complete those items in yellow. So again, this is the summary tab. So just providing the client name, the qualified practitioner, you can identify what date it was completed on, administration type, identifying whether it was by interview or by proxy. And if it is a proxy, you can go ahead and include their name. So if it's a parent or otherwise guardian, include the name of the individual. And then these green tabs here will automatically score and tabulate based on your completion of the other domain-specific tabs at the bottom. Okay, so we'll walk through and talk about how to do that. So again, this is domain 1, understanding and communicating. So you would simply, because again, there are instructions at the top, so potentially could be used, although we're not recommending for use in actual completing the interview. But that it does include the none, the mild, the moderate, how those responses correspond to scores. So again, none is 1, mild is 2, 3 is moderate, 4 is severe, and 5 is extreme or cannot do. So you would make sure that based on how they responded, you would go ahead and mark, in this case, 2 for moderate. Right. So as you do that, you'll notice that the bottom score is giving you the percentage of disability, and the percentage of disability corresponds with the disability score for that domain. So as we complete this, it ends up being 50%, right, or a score of 50 for that domain. And you'll notice that then that starts to translate over automatically to our title page, our summary page. So you'd go through and complete all of those in that same way. I won't spend a lot of time on this. And again, if one is missing, then you would simply sum up and divide by. So for example, if they did not answer walking a long distance, such as a kilometer, you'd add up these 4 and then divide by 4. And whatever number it was closest to, you'd include here. If, however, there was more than one item, it would become invalid because we cannot have more than one item from a specific domain. And it cannot be more than 2 items total across all domains. So that's really important to keep in mind. All right, I'll try to go through this quickly, guys. One of the domain I want to call out is going to be the next one, life activities, right? So this is where, and I maybe should highlight this a different color, but this is where if they are working or in school, you would complete all of them. If they aren't, you would complete only down through those items where it's working or through in school. So you would stop here. If it is somebody that's not working or in school, you'd only go through C6. Otherwise, you'd proceed and go through all the items. And you'll notice that the scores then are different. So this is it's a 30% disability if someone, when they're not working or in school, and a 42% if they are. All right, we're almost done here. So this ends up being sort of a summary page, which then carries forward to our front page. But you can see that the domain score for participation in society, there was 63% disability. The overall score without school, so if this is somebody that was not in school, would be 47. If this is somebody that was in school, 49. And again, these items or these numbers are carried forward to our summary page. And so for 1959 eligibility determination, there is the SFN 741 that you are asked to complete, including the WHODAS section. You would translate these scores. So this 50% becomes a score of 50 for cognition. Mobility becomes a score of 31. Self-care, a score of 50, and so on. Important here then is life activities. So you see there's the D51 and D52. If they're not working in or in school, you would put in D51 for your life activity score. If they are working or in school, you would put in D52, the 42%. So that becomes really important for your translation to the SFN 741, making sure you're grabbing the correct score. And then participation or joining in community activities is 63%. So again, similar to the D51, D52, you're going to want to make sure if that you're grabbing the right score for the summary score based on whether they're working or in school. And I'm going to highlight this so it stands out a little bit more clearly before we send this out to you. Overall score without work. So someone that's not in work would be 47. If they are in work or in school, their score would be a 49. So again, that's what you would use to complete your SFN, and to remember that eligibility scores is 50. So we're right at the cusp, but to be eligible for 1959, you need a complex score of 50 or above. So that completes the administration and scoring training of the WHODAS 2.0 for purposes of 1959 eligibility. It's hoped that you found this to be helpful. Thank you so much for participating.